So it finished at the People's Pension Stadium, Brighton and Hove Albion 0, Arsenal 3. You'll probably notice that this video isn't exactly pitchside at the People's Pension Stadium. One of the many issues with these late Sunday kickoffs is that clubs tend to close their stadiums quite early after the game because, understandably, everyone wants to get home on a Sunday night. So I didn't have time to do it pitchside on Sunday evening. But nevertheless, some thoughts on the game, and I thought another really strong performance from Arsenal. I just sensed since the second half in the home game against Brighton, there's just been, back in January, there's just been a real click with Arsenal. So if you remember that game, Arsenal went into half-time 1-0 down to Brighton. They hadn't really played that well and they came out in the second half like a team possessed and won 2-1. And I just think ever since then, Arsenal have looked really, really on it. Maybe with the exception of the first 20 minutes against Manchester United, which I think was largely down to having to play quite an unfamiliar centre-back pairing in Jen Beattie and Steph Catley, and we lost that continuity in the opening of that game and lost the goal in doing so, and then had to chase the game and got a player sent off. So I think there were some circumstances around that game that meant perhaps we didn't see the best of Arsenal. But other than that, since that second half against Brighton, you can just see quite a few players have really clicked, I think, with what Jonas is asking for. I think dropping Viv into the number 10 position and playing Stina up front has solved some issues. I think before Christmas and New Year, that midfield was a little bit of an issue. Nobody had really nailed that number 10 spot, which still confuses me really, because when you've got players like Jordan Nobbs and Mane Iwabuchi, it's difficult really to understand why that number 10 spot perhaps wasn't working as much. But Viv's come in and basically solved that, quite frankly, because she's such a good player. And in Stina, as we saw against Brighton, there's just that 6-yard box presence. And both of her goals, real strikers' goals, one a tap-in the 6-yard area, one a header from a cross, both provided by Caitlin Ford from either flank. So Arsenal have got a bit more presence in the penalty area, and I think that's something they lost. Perhaps, that last summer they lost players like Danielle van der Donk and Gilles Roord, and so when Viv used to drop quite deep, those players would usually fill in the penalty area, and Arsenal probably haven't had that quite as much and haven't had that penalty box presence. And so dropping Viv into 10 and Stina as the number 9 kind of solves that a little bit. And obviously Viv is just so good that she gets into goal scoring positions, and she really should have scored at least one yesterday. But a brilliant overall performance from Miedema again, and obviously Stina Blackstenius helping herself to a couple of goals. I thought there was quite a clever tactical tweak as well that helped Viv to really control this game. So when Arsenal built up, Leah Volti pushed right out to the left, basically at left back. And what that did was that just dragged Brighton's press one side over to the pitch, and time and again it opened that central space for Miedema. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit more in my kind of tactical breakdown piece later on Monday. But quite a clever little shift. And Leah Volti as well is one of those players who's just playing so well at the moment. So Birmingham last weekend, we saw her really pushed up the pitch, really engaged in that press, playing those passes high up the pitch, as well as, those brilliant passes from deep. And we saw loads of those again against Brighton yesterday. But this time coming over to the left, pulling that Brighton press over, because they play in a bit of a 4-4-1-1. So what they like to do is they try and like to block the passing lanes out of centre-back. So instead of sitting Leah Volti in the centre and potentially having her blocked off, they just moved her over to the left, and that just took a player away. And opened up that central space for Arsenal. It was a clever move, and one that really worked. I asked Jonas after the game about the form of several players, thinking in particular of Leah Volti, Caitlin Ford coming out of this game with 2 assists again, and whether that caused him an issue, a nice issue to have, but an issue when it comes to rotating the team because of the form of individual players. And he said that's exactly his hardest job at the moment. He's got so much talent on the bench, but he's also got so many players who are in top form, and it makes it very difficult to rotate them out. Because he said once you've got players in form like that, you've got to keep them playing. You've got to keep giving them that momentum. But Jonas, did urge some caution. He said that, what Arsenal are doing is a little bit new at the moment with Miedema and Blackstenius, and he said teams will adapt. They will come up with coping strategies, and then we're going to have to be ready to change again if and when that happens. And he also said that he knows his team needs to be more clinical, particularly as they look towards that Champions League tie against Wolfsburg. He said, we're not going to have 15 shots on goal against Wolfsburg. They're not going to give us that many chances, and we have to take them when we get them. So, you know, Jonas very keen to keep his team's feet on the ground, even though he's very pleased with how they're playing at the moment. I think most of us are. And in the first half in particular in this game, Arsenal just finished the game in about a 20-minute spell. And Megan Walsh was probably Brighton's best player on the day, which I think tells you plenty, even if the second half wasn't quite as spectacular as the first. But another really strong performance, particularly with Chelsea winning earlier in the day with that stoppage time goal, when it looked like Aston Villa might hold them to a point and put the title back in Arsenal's hands. But they're 5 points clear, albeit having played two games more than Chelsea, and they just didn't look like they felt any pressure about that at all. Didn't look bothered at all about what had happened earlier in the day, and long may that continue.